5 p.m. on Wednesday for my door. I just kind of felt like going for a ride. So I was at the top of Cactus Canyon, and I'm not super familiar with that area. So on the way back down, I was just sort of picking the way to go, which now just makes me think that God wanted me to find him, you know? Because there was no way I was going to go that way. So I was in some deep-ass sand, and I really wanted to turn around. But for some reason, I didn't. And there was this rock on the ground, and I just drilled it. I went over the handlebars and ended up on the ground. So I got up and I was just kind of dusting myself off, and I looked around and I noticed something by the fence, which turned out to be Matthew. And I mean, I seriously thought it was a scarecrow. I was just like, oh, Halloween's coming up, so I thought it was a Halloween gag and didn't think much of it. So I grabbed my bike and walked around the fence that was there. It was a buck-type fence. And as I got closer, I noticed hair. And that was a major key to me, to knowing he was a human being, was seeing his hair. I mean, I even saw the chest go up and down, and I seriously just thought it was a dummy. You know, I just thought it was some sort of mechanism. But when I saw hair, I knew it was a human being. So I ran as fast as I could to the nearest house and called the police.
Well, I responded to the call.
Officer Reggie Flutie.
When I got there, at first the only thing I could see was partially somebody's feet. Well, I got out of my vehicle and I raced over. I seen what appeared to be a young man, 13, 14 years old. He was so tiny, laid on his back, tied to the bottom end of a pole. And he was covered in partially dry blood all over his head and underneath him, and he was barely breathing. He was doing the best he could. I tried to breathe for him, but I couldn't get his mouth open. His mouth couldn't open for me. He was covered in, like I said, partially dry blood all over his face, except for where it appeared to be where he'd been crying down his face. His head was really distorted. You know, it didn't look normal. It looked as if he had a real harsh head wound.
I worked in the emergency room the night Matthew Shepard was brought in. I don't think any of us can remember seeing a patient in his condition for a long time. I mean, those of us who worked at big city hospitals have seen this, but we've got people here who have not worked at a big city hospital. It's not something you expect here. I mean, you expect it. You expect this type of injuries from a car going down a hill at 80 miles an hour. You expect these gross injuries from something like that. It's horrendous, terrible thing. But what you don't expect is to find out that this happened from someone doing it to another person. The ambulance report said it was a beating. So
There was nothing I could have done for him. I mean, if there was anything I could have done, I would have. But there was nothing. And I was screaming at the top of my lungs at him, you know, something like, hey, wake up! Hello! But he didn't move. He didn't flinch. He didn't anything.
Well, he was tied to the fence. His hands were thumbs out in the cuffing position, the way we handcuff people. He was tied with a real thin white rope to the bottom end of the pole, about 4 inches up off the ground. His shoes were missing, and he was tied extremely tight. So I had to slip my boot knife through there, between his wrist and the rope. But I had to be extremely careful not to harm Matthew any further.
Your first thought is, certainly you'd like to think that someone from out of town will come to raise the peace. I mean, things like this happen.
shit happens, and it happens in Laramie. But when there's been someone who's been beaten repeatedly, now certainly this is something that offends us. I think that's a good word. It offends us.
He was bound extremely tight. And I finally cut him free there. And I'm sorry. We rolled him over on his left side, and he quit breathing. So immediately, we put him back on his back, and that gave me just enough of an adjustment to kind of free him. I seen the EMS unit trying to get to the location. Once the ambulance got there, they put a neck collar on him, put him on a backboard, and scooted him from underneath, and Rob drove the ambulance to the ambulance hospital.
Now the strange thing is, 20 minutes before Matthew came in, Aaron McKinney was brought in by his girlfriend. I guess he got into a fight later on that night back in town. So I'm working on Aaron when the evidence comes in with Matthew. Now at this point, I have no idea that there's a connection at all. So I tell Aaron to wait and I go to treat Matthew. So there's Aaron in one room of the ER and Matthew in another room 2 doors down. As soon as we see Matthew, it's obvious that his care is beyond our capabilities. Called the neurosurgeon at Poudre Valley, and he was on the road in about an hour and 15 minutes, I think.
They showed me a picture. Days later, I saw a picture of Matthew.
I saw Matthew in the paper.
When I saw a picture of Matthew,
I never would have recognized him.
then 2 days later, I found out the connection, and I was struck. There were 2 kids. They were both my patients, and there were 2 kids. I took care of both of them, of both their bodies, their souls. For a minute, I began to wonder if this is how God feels when He looks down on us. How we are all His kids, our bodies, our souls. I had a great deal of compassion for the both of them.